All right, we are gonna go through the Haitian and Latin American Revolution, so there's kind of a bunch thrown together in here. The book covers all of these in 5.2 because all of these political revolutions are driven by the Enlightenment. So, we're looking at explaining the causes and effects of these revolutions, how enlightened they were, how long lasting, how many different groups were incorporated in what they were fighting for, things like that. All of this is still transpiring from the Enlightenment and the ideals that are set forth in it, and how everyone, kind of gets pushed to look for liberty and freedom and equality out of the Enlightenment. So we'll mostly be looking at Spanish territory today and the fight of people against colonial Spain. Here's a couple of things we will be highlighting today. We've pretty much covered everything on this list at this point except for the Tupac Amaru rebellion, but that will be in Unit 6. So the Haitian Revolution. We're looking specifically at Hispaniola, which Dominican Republic and Haiti are going to be the two countries by our standards today. So when we look at this, Haiti is actually a French territory instead of Spanish. When we're kind of looking at it, it's half and half. Spain has one half, France has the other. But either way, it's still a colony that is being run by Imperial Europe. So you can watch this on your own. I would highly advise going and finding the crash course. It's on my Google site, or you can just search it. But it does a really nice job. If you don't want to listen to my lecture, I would suggest going and listening to John Green talk about the Haitian Revolution, because he does a really good job too. So when you look at the social structure, we had seen the Costa system. Their system is a little bit different in Haiti. It's still based on race. It just looks different. So you have the Grand Blancs, which Blanco is white in Spanish. So it's an easy way to remember it, but it's going to be grand, meaning rich or big. These are rich white landowners who pretty much have a lot of freedom in the colony, and they don't face a lot of restrictions on things they do. And under them, you have the Petite Blancs. These are whites who don't own land, and they don't have equal citizenship to the Grand Blancs. So already, even though they're the same race, you don't have them having equal opportunities or equality. So that is one aspect of this where both classes of white people are going to have inequities, and therefore you're going to have the Petite Blancs, which feel like they want to go and demand more rights from the Grand Blancs. Under them, you have free people of color, and they want equality like everyone else, regardless of race. So Petite Blancs want equality for white people, and they're not really considering people of color. The Grand Blancs are fine with everything how it is because they live the high, nice life. The free people of color want equality for everyone, regardless of race. And then you have enslaved people of African descent, and they want equality, but they also want freedom because they don't have that. So everyone has this different station in society, and everyone, except for the Grand Blancs, have things that they want because they are missing liberty, equality, freedom, things like that. The Grand Blancs actually are totally fine with everything how it is, and they don't want things to change because they would lose their importance and their kind of top dog role. So the Haitian Revolution is directly influenced by the French Revolution. They are a French colony, and they hear what has been going on and starting at home because it's overlapping to some extent. The French Revolution starts, and before it ends, Haiti also revolts while France is in like this chaotic state of upheaval. So San Domingo is known for its sugar production and coffee. Remember, we talked about sugarcane being this cash crop of the day. And the slave labor force made up most of the population, which is unfortunately pretty normal at this time in these colonies because they need so many more workers to do all this manual labor on all these giant plantations that they've created. As far as the whites, they were divided again by the Grand Blancs and the Petite Blancs. You had the Grand Blancs being lawyers, plantation owners, merchants, people with access to money and power. And then you had the poor whites, who still, they struggled financially and didn't have as many abilities. They didn't have, a lot of the rights that the upper class had, but they were still living a fine life. They weren't treated differently because of the color of their skin, and they definitely weren't enslaved. So eventually you have people looking at the conditions of slavery in Haiti, and it's one of the worst in the world. There's a super high death rate from being overworked in the sugar, coffee, and indigo plantations. Slaves are often tortured and beaten. And most of these slaves, since they come right from Africa, which is different than America at this, like after 1800, people living in Haiti, they are brought directly over. These new shipments of humans are coming over all the time. And so they remember what freedom is and what it was like before they were forcibly brought over, which makes them fight or want freedom back pretty hard. So when you look at the two white classes, the thing they did have in common was they didn't want racial equality. They did not want the free blacks or the enslaved blacks to be able to rise to a station where they were equal to each other. So they kind of would set aside their economic inequity and equality and issues to unite against people of color. So eventually, all of these people just start fighting each other. You have warring parties of slaves, whites, and free people of color, all battling each other because they all kind of have different goals, right? They all have different things they feel need to be changed, and they don't always want another group coming up to the equal level as them. Toussaint L'Ouverture is the person you need to know. He is actually a former slave. He is well educated and well read in the Enlightenment, and he is actually a really great general. So he does a great job of leading people to resist the French military. At this point in French history, you already have Napoleon in charge, or at least he's not in charge yet. He's a rising general through the ranks and getting his fame. And so that's going to kind of be this other iconic historical figure that Toussaint L'Ouverture is going to kind of have to go toe to toe with. And so what he started doing was just organizing things. He started organizing enslaved Africans into military units. And when this whole rebellion started, the first thing that happened was enslaved people went and they like killed their slave owners. They burned down plantations, and they kind of set this very like big statement tone to fight back. And then from there, it kind of gathered strength. And Toussaint L'Ouverture was just this figurehead that was able to organize those feelings, that movement, that power, that everything, and get it pushed to fight back. So you have a lot of graphic drawings like this, which are showing people getting rid of not only the slave owners, but also the French military that's colonized the place. So, I mean, it's a pretty violent revolution, but so were all the other ones we looked at too. So it's not notably different for the level of violence. The French Revolution usually always reigns supreme on that one. But you do have a revolution now where it has a large like racial tone to it, right? So because enslaved Africans outnumbered whites initially 10-1, which is crazy, a lot of enslaved Africans were allowed to keep their customs. So you still had African-based religions prospering in Haiti, or syncretism happening with like the cultures of voodoo. And so you had still this like ethnic bonding thing that kept them kind of feeling together or similar or bonded in some way. So Toussaint L'Ouverture writes this letter: "Brothers and friends, I am Toussaint L'Ouverture. My name is perhaps known to you. I have undertaken vengeance. I want liberty and equality to reign in San Domingo. I want to bring them into existence. Unite yourselves to us, brothers, and fight with us for the same cause." So you're very humble and a very obedient servant. So he's sending this, trying to ask for help, freeing this colony, and kind of this idea that just free us, things would be better off. We would love it if you would just grant us freedom, and then the war would stop. So what ends up happening is he joins forces with the Spanish army against the French, because French own Haiti. And so he's like, I'll just get another European power that is competing with France all the time, and maybe they'll like, help me beat them. So he rises in the ranks in the Spanish military, and then France eventually abolishes slavery. So he switches sides because he's like, Spain's still really into slavery. Maybe the French are finally understanding that this is a fight for independence for slaves. As a former slave, Toussaint L'Ouverture finds this really important. So he goes and he joins the French side now. And basically, your book kind of describes it as he pits the French, Spanish, and English all against each other and starts this like internal conflict of European powers and just makes things really, really messy. Eventually, his movement does kind of come out on top, and he grants himself like dictator for life, which is questionable when we talk about like the idea of getting rid of absolute monarchs, but he's been a very successful general. A lot of people support him, so it seems kind of okay. Eventually, troops start withdrawing, and it appears that maybe Haiti will be this independent nation. It's not yet, but it seems like it might soon be. So what happens is he liberates the entire island from slavery, but there's still a high demand for sugar and coffee, and there's no way that they want to let that go. So Napoleon sought to take back control of the island and wanted to reinstate slavery, and they send French forces over. Louverture thinks that they are still his buddies because he paired up with them. They are not. They end up arresting him, and he's imprisoned, and he dies there. So Haiti is still not free. It is not successful, but you do have, slavery being beaten at this point. Like, it's gone. And down the line, you do have another revolt that is led. A war breaks out, lots of people die, but eventually France just cuts it off. They're like, this is not worth our time. We can't keep supplying our troops over there. We have other stuff we need and want to do. And so they end up just letting Haiti go as a colony. And so it's the first one of the colonies in this region to gain its freedom and abolition, from slavery. And also it's the first country at this point in time in the Western Hemisphere that is run by people of color, which is super significant. So ask yourself, because one of our discussions that I'm hoping to work in next week is looking at all these different political revolutions and asking which one do you think was actually the most enlightened? When we look at the elements of the Enlightenment, which one of these actually got the closest to achieving enlightenment? It's not just about independence, it's about what are you getting independent for, who is involved, what factors in the Enlightenment are actually carried out and how well. All right, that is it for Haiti. So I'm going to pause the video here so you can just watch one at a time if you want, and then we'll jump into Latin American revolutions.